Welcome to the show, folks. I'm Gregor Havener. Today I'm fighting by sea with some destroyers in World of Warships for the purpose of covering some of the first not British ships to set off in the game. Of course, I mean the Russians. Hey, look, I get it. The Royal Navy was big and all, guys, but the company making this game is based in Russia. Or Belarus? Or Ukraine? Wait. The company has strong ties to Russia. Surely we can come to an understanding there? Good. Alright. Just go down the line, drown your sorrows that way, in vodka and goulash, whilst listening to Tchaikovsky. Because they're gonna be OP anyway, because of Russian bias, right? What do you have to lose? I digress. We have 2 premium ships right now, 3 if you want to be technical, those being the Aurora and the Murmansk, and they're fairly effective vessels in their own right, but come the next patch, some more varieties coming. The first batch of German ships come to the game in the form of cruisers, and the first batch of Soviet ships come to the game in the form of destroyers. As in, they're gonna destroy game balance! There's another Russian bias joke. The Tier 5 Gromyashi preceded this line some time ago, and those who got the ship when it was out will probably feel right at home with this line. Currently we only have 2 lines of destroyers in the game, just like 2 lines of battleships and cruisers, those being from the American and Japanese navies. American destroyers, as you guys probably know for the most part, are gunboats, fast-firing guns and good handling characteristics. Japanese destroyers are a bit stealthier and faster, and they rely more on their torpedoes, but their brawling characteristics leave a lot to be desired. What, then, would the Soviets have to offer? I'll take a look at some and tell you what makes them unique. So, as you can see, all we have is one line that simply goes from Tier 1 to Tier 10 in a straight line, much like the German cruisers coming alongside these ships. I think if nothing else, speed is something that makes these ships stand out. Around midway down the line and onwards, these ships gain a very large amount of engine power, and their torpedoes are pretty fast as well, with quick reload times. This applies to their guns as well, generally having fast fire rates. However, there are some downsides, as expected. Generally, the range of these torpedoes will be quite short, shorter than either of their American or Japanese counterparts, and the turrets handle pretty slowly around mid-tier. Like anything else, if you play to the strengths of these ships, you can circumvent these issues. So, let's take a look at the ship specifically. Likely the first Soviet ship that anyone will play if they haven't bought the premium ships already, the Tier 1 Orlan starts off the line. Now, the Orlan isn't a destroyer itself, like her contemporaries. She's a light patrol vessel, a paper ship based off of something Wargaming found somewhere in a dark alleyway. Nothing really special about it other than her 130mm guns, which are fairly large for her tier, and they have a high rate of fire. However, I do think it's important to note the caliber of these guns because it will come up later on down this line. The first destroyer in the line is the Tier 2 Storozhevoy. Storozhevoy was a name given to one of several ships classified as torpedo boat destroyers in 1915. I'm not sure what class specifically this ship is from, and I couldn't really find any pictures of it. And the term torpedo boat seems a bit strange. I don't know what specifically defines a torpedo boat, but in World of Warships, she's a destroyer, regardless. It's what you'd expect of a low-tier destroyer. She's very quick and has rapid-firing guns along with torpedoes, launched from 3 triple launchers. Those torpedoes have a very short range though, so a good captain of this ship needs to use a little bit of cunning to get the most out of them. Aside her contemporaries, the Storozhevoy has longer main battery range, faster fire rates, comparable concealment to the Umakaze, but very, very slow turret traverse, with the shortest torpedo range out of any Tier 2 destroyers. Moving on to Tier 3, the Derzki class destroyer. The Derzki was one of 9 Derzki class destroyers that was a part of the Black Sea Fleet, based off of the well-known Novik destroyer. Many of these ships were interned in Benzat in Tunisia, operated by counter-revolutionaries fleeing the country during the Russian Revolution. This was considered a good class of ship. One of them even served in World War II, although she was sunk pretty early on in 1941. She relies almost entirely on her torpedoes, 5 fast-firing twin launchers, but also has 3 100mm guns. However, she's actually slower than the Tier 2 Storozhevoy. Some of the favorable aspects of the Derzki include her fast fire rate and her very large hit point pool. Her firing range is comparable to that of the Wix, but her turret traverse is also very, very slow. And once again, her torpedo range is very, very short, 3 kilometers just like the Storozhevoy. After the Derzki is the Tier 4 Izyaslav, another class of destroyers based off of the Novik, so she's similar to the Derzki in many ways. her guns and speed leave some to be desired. 5 100 mils as opposed to 3, but the same torpedo configuration as the Tier 3 as well. The Izyaslav and other ships of her class also served in World War II, but any that did were sunk very early on in the summer of 1941. The Izyaslav's favorable characteristics have to do with her guns. She has longer main battery range, a faster rate of fire, but once again very slow turret traverse, just like the Derzki and the Storozhevoy. She's also a bit less nimble of a ship, and her torpedoes, quite honestly, aren't that good. They're slow, and she doesn't have quite as many as either of the Tier 2s. The torpedoes themselves do reload faster, though. So at this point, you might be a bit skeptical about these ships, given that half of them so far are paper ships, and the ones that weren't paper ships got, well, wrecked during the war. This changes at Tier 5, though, where we start to see some pretty potent ships come into being, at least from what I can gather. If you're familiar with the Gramyashi, then you'll find the Tier 5 Gnevny familiar. Gnevny was one of several Gnevny-class destroyers, and the Gramyashi herself was also a Gnevny-class destroyer, though she had a much more illustrious service career than the Gnevny, which was sunk by mines in the summer of 1941. Ironically, the Gnevny destroyers were designed with help from fascist Italy, of which the Soviet Union would, of course, become an opponent of during the war. Despite some structural problems and limited seaworthiness, a number of these ships survived throughout the war. 4 130 mils, as well as 2 triple torpedo tubes. However, like other Soviet destroyers, the range of those torpedoes is very short. Interestingly, the Gnevny has, quote, better AAA with a couple of 45s. Her gun range is comparable to that of the Nicholas, with a faster rate of fire for those guns. However, once again, her torpedoes have a very low range, but those torpedoes reload pretty quick, although the damage per torpedo is the same as the Minakaze. At Tier 6 is the Ognevoi. Built to modernize the Soviet destroyer fleet, these ships were never able to be built within the Second World War due to the fact that the yard at which they were being constructed was raided by German forces in the early stages of the war. Most of them were finished in the late 1940s and proved to be very popular with Soviet sailors, forming the basis of design for the Cold War-era Skory-class destroyers. She carries 4 130mm guns mounted in dual-barreled turrets, unlike the Gnevny, which only has single barrels, and several torpedoes. But although the range of her torpedoes is still short, they move at 65 knots. The Ognevoi has comparable range of her main batteries to the Farragut. However, unlike earlier tiered ships, they don't fire quite as fast. In addition, her concealment ratings are less than stellar, once again, lower torpedo range, generally unfavorable on paper. I suspect this will be the ugly duckling of the Soviet destroyer line. I think Tier 7 is where the Soviet destroyers really start to stand out. A derivative of the Tashkent-class destroyer built under the label Project 48, Kiev was one of 10 ships meant to operate in the Black Sea. She was halfway through construction when the shipyard was seized by German forces to eventually be scrapped. An additional dual-barreled turret for a total of 6 130s, quintuple torpedo launchers, and some anti-aircraft guns. Her top speed, impressively, around 43 knots, faster than either the Tier 7 Meihan or Hatsuharu. The Kiev has slightly higher gun range than the Meihan, but the rate of fire of her guns is slightly slower, although she does have 6 guns as opposed to 5. Her concealment ratings are less than stellar, but she's very quick for a Tier 7, and her torpedoes are wicked quick. Although, once again, they have a very low effective range. Tier 8 hosts what is essentially a bigger, badder Kiev, the Tashkent. A very well-known Soviet ship with an illustrious service career, nicknamed the Blue Cruiser due to her distinctive cobalt blue color. Of course, all these pictures are in black and white, so you can imagine, I guess. Captained by the famed Vien Eroshenko, most of her combat record was built during the siege of Sevastopol with the Black Sea Fleet, making a number of supply runs delivering food, supplies, and soldiers, as well as evacuating wounded troops in addition to women and children. Comparable to a light cruiser in combat capability, her 6 130s are just as much of a formidable force at Tier 8 as they are at Tier 7, and she's rather maneuverable. What's very noteworthy indeed is the fact that the range of her torpedoes is raised to a much better 8 kilometers. Seems like a very versatile Tier 8 ship. The Tashkent has the same effective firing range for her main guns as the Benson. Her concealment isn't quite as good. Once again, this is a theme with late-tier Soviet destroyers. although she's very, very fast in a straight line, but her torpedoes reload at a pretty slow rate. At Tier 9 is a paper design that never made it off of the drawing board. The Udaloy was meant to inherit the better qualities of her predecessors. The 130s get a faster rate of fire, and a much, much faster turret turning rate. She's not quite as quick as the Tashkent at about 40 knots, but her maneuvering capabilities are still very good from what I can see. Like many of the other late-tier Soviet destroyers, the Udaloy has comparable gun characteristics to that of her American counterparts. Her concealment is actually comparable to the Fletcher, though, and she's quite fast in a straight line. This is where the Soviet destroyers actually get torpedo range, too, albeit the Khabarovsk has 15-kilometer torpedo range, which is almost twice as much as either the American or the Soviet contemporaries that face it. There's nothing particularly special about the Udaloy's torpedo speed, and she has the slowest torpedo reload speed of any of the Tier 9 destroyers. Tier 10 crowns the Soviet destroyer line with another paper design. To some that might be a bit underwhelming, but this looks like a damn effective ship. 2 quintuple torpedo launchers make the Tier 10 Khabarovsk very well capable of dealing a good amount of damage over a large area, but this ship boasts guns of the highest caliber for any Tier 10 destroyer at 130mm. The highest amount of hit points for any Tier 10 destroyer at 22,500 hit points, and the highest top speed of any ship in the game at 43.4 knots. If that doesn't say anything in and of itself, I don't know what will. This seems like a hell of a ship. Fast with a good deal of guns, and a fair bit of survivability. Not that it's going to amount to much with HE getting spammed at you, but it's something. Khabarovsk actually has pretty decent AA for a Tier 10 destroyer. She has the highest main battery range of any Tier 10 destroyer, with middling rate of fire for her guns. Her concealment isn't that great, her torpedo range isn't that great, and her torpedoes actually do lower damage, move slower, and the reload time is slower as well. This is a bit circumvented by the fact that, once again, the Khabarovsk is the fastest ship in the game at around 43.5 knots. However, she handles like a Chevy Corvette, in the sense that she can go really fast in a straight line, but she's not particularly nimble. And that is the Soviet destroyer line. In summary, these ships are really, really fast in a straight line, fast-moving torps, fast-firing guns. I get the feeling that at later tier, these ships are going to favor a very balls-to-the-wall kind of playstyle, especially at earlier tiers due to the short range of their torpedoes, but this is alleviated later on down the line. Perhaps the very early tier ships leave some aspects to be desired, but what I see on paper right now is very, very promising. Stemming from a nation of very proud people, the history of the Russian Navy from the imperial age of Peter the Great to the modern day is very rich and colorful. In the East, land-based war machines take up most of the spotlight in regards to the conflicts of World War II, but even fighting with limited industrial capacity, Soviet sailors fought with great tenacity in the Black Sea, and particularly during the siege of Leningrad. Though suffering heavy losses over the course of the war, many of these ships were part of what made the Soviet Navy a capable fighting force. Fast and fierce, to the scrapper of a captain who's not afraid to get their hands dirty, these ships should serve well. If you liked my overview about these ships, you'll probably also like my overview about the German cruiser line, and those ships are going to be coming alongside these ships on October 19th. I'll leave a link to it in the description. It follows the same kind of format. If you liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe for more content like this. My name is Gregory Havener. Thanks so much for watching.